Alright, everyone, welcome to episode number 32 of Everyday Thoughts. It's gonna be a bit shorter episode. I finished reading the book from Cal Newport about deep work, but there wasn't a lot of knowledge that I can actually apply in the last chapter, that I personally can apply it, so I don't think it's worth sharing if I can apply it myself. But what I can do is tell you about not letting the small things or small bad things take up a lot of your mental capacity and a lot of focus. Just learn how to let go of small bad things, because if you don't, you're gonna have a really big problem once a bigger problem happens or comes around. But if you're prepared, or you're basically prepared by mostly ignoring the small bad things. What I mean by that is just things that don't actually impact you in the long run a lot. So not like, for example, small things like missing for example, missing a workout, because that can actually compound over time, psychology, etc. But I mean just small things like, for example, I don't know, fucking know, missing an email that isn't that important and is quite vague and you wouldn't even know correctly how to respond to it. I mean small problems like those. And yes. And then what I also find really interesting is the new research coming out on so-called long length partials. So turns out, or a lot more studies are coming out, that especially for hypertrophy, so building muscle, long length partials might actually be more effective than full range of motion. That doesn't mean that you're supposed to half rep every single thing, but me personally, I started implementing them quite a bit, especially on like last sets, or like on exercises like fucking, I don't know, lateral raises, where you can basically always keep going a bit more if you don't go with the full range of motion. And what long length partials basically means is, I think the easiest way of explaining that is, when you have a straight arm, that is when you have a lengthened bicep, and basically just going halfway to like 90 degrees and not fully up, that would be like a long length partial. Maybe even a bit less, but the important thing is that you have the muscle lengthened. So, for example, with squats, that would be you kind of start in a deep squat, and then you just go up a little bit beyond parallel, and you drop down again. Don't mix it up with short length partials, which would basically just be you start at the top of a curl, you go like to fucking 90 degrees, and you go up again. That is not really effective. But long length partials are. And the same rules apply for them as for full range of motion. So basically what you can do is explosive up and controlled negative. And that way, the pump is actually insane from those. So if you want to try them out, especially on lateral raises, pec deck, and curls, or generally in arms in general, I find them on compounds quite difficult to do correctly, so and I don't really see the point of skipping full range of motion on compounds, since I'm not really training for hypertrophy on them, but mostly strength, especially when it comes to calisthenics. So like, I'm not gonna do like long length partials on weighted pull-ups, because for me, strength wise, it just doesn't make sense. But if you just want to purely build muscle and aesthetics, of course, then long length partials might be a very good idea to implement into your training. And that is basically it for today. Thank you for watching.